I love the liveliness, the constant feeling of energy.
Definitely the world-class education.
The diversity. Nah, the nightlife.
I would say the people.
For me, it's the stories. My name is Waja, and welcome to Toronto Story Archive. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Toronto Story Archive. You know, moving to Toronto changed everything for me. New city, new place, new people, new perspectives. Honestly, it was a culture shock, and it took me some time to get my bearings. In the almost 10 years since moving to Toronto, I've had the opportunity to live in many parts of the city and the GTA. When I first moved here back in 2008, I lived in Mississauga, in the Port Credit area. Every day, I'd commute back and forth to U of T's downtown campus via the GO. In my first year at Ryerson, and for most of the 5 years that followed, I rented a bachelor pad at Yonge and Eglinton. In my last year, it was Church and Wellesley. Then, after graduation, Parkdale. Now, engaged living, I live in East York. Each new place with a new opportunity to explore, to meet people, to hear their stories. It was also an opportunity to challenge the perspectives and preconceptions that I had held, sometimes since childhood. But that's the beauty of people. That's the beauty of stories. Each new one is a new opportunity to rediscover the world around us, and in so doing, rediscover ourselves. I mean, at least that's how it's been for me, and it's something I have in common with this week's storyteller. This week, I have the pleasure of chatting with Armaan Verma. Armaan is an undergraduate student studying business management at Ryerson University in the Ted Rogers School of Management. He is an accomplished speaker, the president of Ryerson Toastmasters, and his passion for martial arts has led him to become the training group leader for Ryerson Ninjutsu. Coming at us from downtown Toronto, welcome Armaan.
Hey Mo, how's it going? A pleasure to be here on the podcast today.
Great to have you, man. I have to start by asking you the one question that we ask every single person who comes onto Toronto Story Archive, and that is, what is one thing you love about Toronto?
Well, that's a great question. I would probably have to say the smell.
The smell.
No, I'm totally just kidding. I would say it's the diversity of people you get to meet on a daily basis.
The diversity? So I mean, tell me a bit about yourself. Where did you come from? Did you start out in downtown Toronto? I mean, I know I started out in North Bay, and North Bay is a much smaller city. It was especially a much smaller city when I was growing up, and I know that there was kind of a culture shock when I went from living in North Bay to living in Toronto. It's bigger, there's more people, there's more perspectives. I mean, where did you come from? How did you find it?
So I grew up in I guess I make the joke with my friends that still live there, the butthole of Mississauga, which is essentially known as Malton. Yeah, it's near Pearson Airport. It's a small little kind of town, and I wouldn't say it's one of the most luxurious neighborhoods. Sort of a place that has a lot of government housing kind of thing. I grew up there. Was born in a Brampton hospital, but grew up my whole life in Malton. And then it was at the young, ripe age of 17, I moved to downtown Toronto, to the Church and Wellesley Village, and I've been here ever since. So it's been about almost 4 years now.
I feel that completely. I mean, I was 17 when I first moved to Toronto. So when I first moved here, I moved to Port Credit in Mississauga. I actually started out living with my grandparents before I moved out on my own to downtown. So I guess it was kind of a tiered experience for me, moving from my hometown, my parents' house, a more sheltered location, to a very slightly less sheltered location in my grandparents' home, to finally striking out and living more on my own. How did you find that transition? How did you find that movement?
Well, for me, I was actually really lucky because growing up, I had the chance to start martial arts when I was quite young, so back in 2008. And my sensei, he's a firm believer in having your martial arts sort of emanate and permeate throughout your life. So he's actually the one who made me responsible in terms of, my cooking, my cleaning, my making sure I mowed the lawn at my dad's house kind of thing. So he actually sort of helped instill these kind of responsibilities and fundamental duties at a very young age. And with that, I started to learn how to cook when I was like 13 years old, flambeing my pasta sauces and making chicken cordon bleu and all that fun stuff. So the skills, the transfer, I guess, from living with my family to now living on my own with a buddy of mine from high school was actually quite easy. It was pretty seamless, to be honest.
I mean, the beginning and end of my cooking skills are eggs. I mean, I can make a variety of eggs. I occasionally put onions in a pan, and yeah, man. I mean, there's some mean eggs. You chop some veggies, you throw them in a frying pan with butter, and then eventually you pour eggs on top of them. And what you're left with, you can post it on Instagram with the right filter, and it looks like you made an omelet. It's fantastic. It's a strategy that I've applied liberally throughout the years when I'm not, eating sushi and takeout. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned that because Gordon Ramsay always says that if a person knows how to make a good set of eggs, he's a pretty good cook. So I think you have something going there, Mo.
Maybe if this podcast doesn't work out, I'll transition into a full-time chef. Make another one of those purely egg-based restaurants. I'll just change the veggies I put in the pan each time, and then the outcome, hopefully, will be exactly what we're looking for.
I'll make sure I refer all my friends in Toronto to come check out your restaurant then for sure.
Perfect. That's that TRSM entrepreneurial spirit right there. So,
Yes,
right
indeed.
now, you're... Exactly. Right now, you're in the Ted Rogers School of Management, and you're the president of Ryerson Toastmasters. Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, we want to get to know you before we get into your story. Now that you're, living downtown and you've experienced a few years of university living, how did you move into the point of being the president of Ryerson Toastmasters?
Yeah, well, that's sort of an interesting story. Toastmasters was an organization, again, mentioned to me by my sensei, my martial arts instructor. I wanted to improve my communication abilities, but in high school, I wasn't old enough to join a Toastmasters club. So when I came to university, I saw that there was a Toastmasters chapter at Ryerson, and I decided to compete in a competition called Ryerson's Next Top Speaker, where the topic for the year was, what does fearlessness mean to you? And I spoke about a very, difficult topic at the time. That was something very close to home. Ended up placing third and being the recipient of the People's Choice Award. And then from there, I knew that I wanted to be involved with this initiative to help people cultivate their communication, leadership, and public speaking skills through practice. So what I did from there is I joined the team as the director of corporate relations, essentially establishing corporate partnerships with either small to medium to large enterprises, not-for-profits, and things of the sort. Then moving on to be the vice president of corporate relations, and then finally applying to become the president. And now I'm here.
That's fantastic. Yeah, so, when you're talking about these experiences, the transition from moving from home life to downtown, living with one of your old friends from high school, when you're talking about Toastmasters, one of the common threads here seems to be martial arts and the instruction and the discipline that martial arts instilled in you. So I guess the question that, is probably on a number of listeners' minds at this point is, what is Ninjutsu? And can you tell me a bit about how you moved into a leadership role? Because these leadership roles seem to be kind of a defining characteristic of, your journey in Toronto thus far.
Yeah, that's actually that's a great question, Mo. When you look at the word ninjutsu, nin broken down translates into perseverance. Jitsu translates into skill or technique. So essentially, if you're looking at ninjutsu from a broad and very, maybe a 30,000 foot overview, it essentially translates into the skills of perseverance or the techniques of perseverance, which is applied through a multitude of different facets in life. My sensei's always told me that, ninjutsu isn't just in the dojo, it's out there in your life as well. And I think that for the amount of years that I've been training, it sort of just becomes a natural process for you to want to then shift into a leadership role, not to be in charge and to tell people what to do, but to help empower them so that they know that they have the ability to accomplish their goals and reach the tasks that may seem impossible for them at a certain point. Because I know I've definitely been there, and my sensei was the one who helped me realize and is still helping me realize my true potential. So that's why leadership is such a, I guess, important thing, and has been an important thing in my journey in downtown Toronto. And I try and, I guess, give back in that aspect as much as I can.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it in the business world a lot recently. That movement towards employee engagement, employee empowerment, working with the people around you to ensure that when they connect with others, it's from the most powerful possible perspective. I mean, we're all people at the end of the day, and we need to make sure that when we engage with those that we're leading, we're not just telling them what to do and taking them from point A to what they have to do at point B, but I guess empowering them to be better at whatever it is they're doing so that they, in turn, as they connect with other people, can make those people better, passing that empowerment down the line.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a great way to understand like what you sort of just laid out there for everybody is Simon Sinek. He mentions a concept called the golden circle. I think it's in one of his TED Talks called like How Great Leaders Inspire Action or something of the sort. And he says that and the outermost end of the circle is the question what. On the middle inner part of the circle is the question how. And in the center of the circle, and arguably the most important question, is why. And what's sort of taken away from this is that people's conviction or belief in the actions that they are doing increases when you reach the center of the circle. So telling someone what to do might not give them a lot of belief or conviction in what they're doing. Telling someone how to do it will give them a little more, but telling someone why they're doing what they're doing really cuts the heart of the issue and has them buy into the idea fully.
Absolutely. I'm familiar with the TED Talk. It is one of the strongest ones out there for sure. So in the pursuit of these leadership goals, in the pursuit of leading, of your work with Ryerson, Ninjutsu, and Toastmasters and the like, I guess you've had the opportunity to experience many people from many different backgrounds. I mean, I know that just living in Toronto and engaging with multiple aspects in the business world and the public speaking world, I've had that opportunity. So I guess this kind of leads into your story today. Tell me a bit about the people that you've met and coming from a different place to living in downtown, which is this mosaic of people and perspectives and ideas and cultures and personalities. What was that like for you?
As you sort of mentioned in the beginning, I would say shock was one of the things that was quite up there. Going back to where I grew up, I now currently live in the Church and Wellesley village, where the LGBTQ community is celebrated and prominently here, which I think is great. But before I moved over here with my roommate in first year, I didn't really know much of the area, and I didn't really actually traverse much of the downtown core, being younger. And then being a heterosexual male who grew up in my neighborhood that wasn't actually very open at all to people who subscribe to the LGBTQ community. I mean, if you were gay in my high school, you would get beaten up, like you would get like the crap kicked out of you kind of thing. And that's just sort of kind of not the mentality that I had personally, but the mentality that was around in the neighborhood that I grew up. So when I shifted over and I came to the Church in Wellesley Village, not quite sure of I guess the demographic of people that resided here, it was a little shocking to me at first, because I never had that kind of exposure to people that were lesbian, bisexual, or gay, queer. So I didn't really necessarily know how to really react, respond, behave, and at times I found myself being quite judgmental, and mostly because of the predispositions that were there in my neighborhood growing up. And so as time evolved in my first year and walking down the street, I'd see guys holding hands or girls holding hands. I came to sort of start tying in martial art concepts, things that my senseis mentioned to me that, at the end of the day, we're all just human beings. And removing this programming of the neighborhood I grew up in, I came to the realization, it sort of lifted the veil of ignorance, you could say, that I had shrouded over my eyes, to then see that it doesn't matter what your sexual orientation is, or anything of the sort, or what you subscribe to at that point. It's just that we should all celebrate our differences and be happy about them, because our differences is what makes us human at the end of the day. And our power of choice, and to leverage our choice to do things that we find desirable, pleasurable, and make us happy on the inside might differ from person to person. But at the end of the day, I believe that if you're not harming anybody, then what you're doing is definitely well within the realm of, I guess, appropriateness. So, yeah, coming from that background, that very, very ignorant kind of background, to now shifting over into this neighborhood, I'd say that I'm very fortunate to have had this experience living here for the past 4 years, because now I can definitely say that while I guess I did have, let's say, homophobic traits in the beginning, none of that exists anymore. And I just simply look at people who prescribe to the LGBTQ community not as people who prescribe to that community, but simply as human beings.
And that's important. I think it's a challenge. It's a challenge for all of us on some level to overcome things that we grew up with and things that exist around us. In a very real way, we as people are the product of our environment. And it's something that at times we definitely need to find a way to overcome. Now, the nature of that, how extreme that is, shifts from one person to the next. But I think that's one of the beautiful aspects of Toronto, and that sort of diversity, that difference in perspective, that difference in creed or culture or orientation or preference is something that is so, or at least should be, and it is for the most part, as far as I've seen, so thoroughly celebrated within this city. That's definitely something that I enjoyed when I first arrived here. It was a culture shock to me as well, and it's a culture shock, I think, to many people, especially people who come from smaller neighborhoods or smaller towns where they may not be exposed to as many ideas. And I think the coolest part and the best part is that you had that opportunity and that you absorbed it, and instead of fighting against it, as some people unfortunately do, you absorbed it and allowed it to truly change your perspectives and overcome those preconceptions that you might have had about Toronto and the people within it. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, definitely. I'm really grateful for the experience, and I still am really, really grateful for it. It's interesting because it sort of expands your horizon, which is sort of kind of the beautiful part, like you mentioned about the city. Aside from the fact that rent costs or housing costs are going up like crazy, that's a whole different conversation. What we can appreciate is sort of the multicultural melting pot and the beauty of all the craziness, yet how it somehow has like this cohesiveness and harmonious kind of flow to it. So I think people who do live in Toronto are definitely lucky for that, and for those of them who are embracing these differences and perspectives, ideologies, and cultures are truly the ones that are making the most of Toronto. They're the ones that are growing the most from the experience. If you just live in Toronto and like you just go to your job and you come back home and you're not maybe trying to look at different aspects of the city, you're really just wasting your time here. At least I think. I think the city is there for you to explore in some way, shape, or form, or have some piece of it yours to call home, or your one go-to kind of spot that you like being at.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, one of the things that I find gratifying, especially from this conversation, is that at a time and a place socially, politically, where there is such a degree of, I guess, intolerance existing in the world, that we can remember that at times we can move in the other direction towards a perspective, a viewpoint of greater acceptance, greater tolerance, appreciation, and in fact, love of that very diverse environment around us. So I think at this point, I have to ask you the last question that we usually ask everyone who comes on Toronto Story Archive. And that is, if you could recommend one place to be or one thing to do in Toronto, what would it be?
I'd recommend going over to the southeast corner of Yonge and Gerrard. And if you haven't ever heard of ramen, Japanese kind of dish, it's soup and noodles, it serves, personally, I think one of the best bowls of ramen in the city has to offer. And I mean, being a guy who's been studying Ninjutsu for quite a while, finding a good ramen place is quite important. So whenever my sensei is downtown, him and I go together, and I've taken a bunch of friends there. So I definitely say check out Ryerson, Raijin, at the southeast corner of Yonge and Gerrard. It'll give you the true Japanese experience for ramen.
That's fantastic. I'll be honest with you, I have never been there. So this is definitely something that I will, take my fiance to at some point. But that was amazing. Thank you so much, Armaan. Thank you for being on the show. Thank you for sharing your views with us and telling us about lifting that veil of ignorance. Something that I think every single person can appreciate, especially in today's world.
Not a problem, Mo. It's my pleasure being here. Thank you so much for having me.
Alrighty, there you have it. Armaan Verma, everyone. And that's a wrap for this week's episode of Toronto Story Archive. Each episode, we bring on guests from Toronto to tell us a story, any story, about their life in Toronto. Our commitment is to not sell, pitch, or bore you. Our goal is to amuse, excite, and at the end of the day, entertain you with stories told by the many voices Toronto has to offer. If you have a story to share, please feel free to shoot me an email to submissions@torontostoryarchive.com. My name is Waja, and thank you. Thank you for tuning in to Toronto Story Archive.